Welcome back to our discussion of the 14 defining characteristics of fascism. Yesterday we did number 11, disdain for intellectuals and the arts. And today we're on number 12, obsession with crime and punishment. Under fascist regimes, the police are given almost limitless power to enforce laws. The people are often willing to overlook police abuses and even forego civil liberties in the name of patriotism. There is often a national police force with virtually unlimited power in fascist nations. Huh.
These are all relevant. Every single one so far.
Yeah.
Yep. We're 12 for 12 and we're going to be 13, or we're, 11 for 11 and we're now going to be 12 for 12. So again, this whole obsession with crime and punishment thing, I mean, we put more people in prison than China, even though we have less people than China. You know, we put a lot more people in prison than China does. A much bigger percentage of the population.
We also have a militarized police force in every city of this country.
Yeah. Police don't look like they did 10, 15 years ago. You know, they've got big tactical vests and assault rifles and, you know, I mean, they look like they're here to hand out a beatdown. And
they look like an occupying force in the cities. That's what they look like.
They do. They definitely do. And
I think the first time we realized that as a nation was with Boston, the Boston bombing, correct? Is where it really starts being talked about more. It wasn't that we didn't know it was happening, or at least the majority didn't know it was happening, but when we actually saw the response with Boston bombing, and then afterwards with the people being locked in their houses for days, and you know, just the amount of blatant rights taken away in that situation, and being told you can't come out of your house.
Weren't and then the fear door-to-door warrantless searches too?
Yeah, they were. And they had, that's where we saw I think that's one of the first times, if you think in at least in recent memory, with the militarized police and the tanks going down the street, the LRADs and everything like that. And then we see it used, at least it was being used prior to Ferguson, but we start seeing it being talked about more with Ferguson because of all of the videos that came out from the Ferguson protests. But it was being used prior to that with the James Boyd protest in New Mexico and Albuquerque about 3 or 4 months before that.
Well, Ferguson was an eye-opener for everyone because, I mean, I've been through police brutality, and, you know, I've made a lot of progress coming back from a lot of the just anger, hatred, fear that I had as a result, but I wasn't there when Ferguson popped off, and even I was just like, is this really happening? You know, my expectations were pretty low of law enforcement, and I was even, like, caught off balance, like, no fucking way. But there it was.
It's where you get this kind of split in the nation, is where you start to see it, this kind of, I'm 100% behind the police, attitude you get from one group and then other groups who are calling them out, and like you had to choose a side, and it was just amazing to see, like, being here in St. Louis, being in Ferguson on the night after Mike Brown was killed. It was eye-opening as well as horrifying, seeing what the police were doing. And then you're absolutely right that it opened eyes, because, I mean, I've been teaching about this for 10 years. I had been talking about it openly, about police brutality, about every month I'd show, or at least bring up a new name that they didn't hear about on TV, of somebody killed by police. This is something that I've been actively involved in studying for almost 17 years now. And I followed the lack of convictions and the lack of charges, and when it got brought to the national level and people started talking about it, and then you start getting more and more names and you get more information, I think is really where it is. Social media changed all of this. And I'm telling you that from an academic standpoint. Social media changed all of this because you get to learn more. We know that the news media and the local media stations aren't going to report how things actually occurred. They're only reporting the police side of the story. But being somebody who had even taught for 10 years at that point, talking about this, seeing it with your own eyes, it doesn't matter. It changes everything. I'd been teaching about the media and how not to, not always believe everything they say, but seeing how the media reported on something I was standing right there at changed everything for me.
Yeah, I've noticed over the years, like with the LA riots, the police are more passive. They kind of just stood by their cars a lot. They were kind of terrified. They'd block off the streets. They had helmets and shields and stuff. But it wasn't like, even a protest, it would be, it wouldn't be the same as it is now. And then just slowly and gradually, pretty soon you have these military guys lined up with all these tactics. It's not just beating people and kind of mayhem all over. It's really organized. It's really military-like. They have the vehicles from war kind of type vehicles on the streets, and I've seen it, the evolution of it kind of happen in front of my eyes here in LA. And I know for a fact I've seen these militarized police before Ferguson and before all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I was saying. I just know that they were there. I'm saying you're absolutely right. I'm glad that I'm not glad that you've seen it. That sounds horrible. You know what I mean? I'm glad you brought that up, because when I'm talking about, coming to our attention, I really am talking like nationwide. People are at least knowing that it was occurring, even though if you had been following the 1033 program, you knew exactly where all those militarized vehicles and all those AK-47s and all of those, everything was going. But most people don't follow those things, and I don't blame them. There's too many things to follow at one time, and I get that.
Yes.
And if we want to go back to our obsession with crime and punishment, this isn't something that's always been there. We see this really comes into play right after the Jim Crow laws are overturned, right with the civil rights activists in the 60s, and then in 1970 with Nixon and the Southern Strategy. And I implore everybody to watch 13th, the documentary. It does an amazing job of showing our history of our obsession with crime and punishment and exactly how it was made, how it was used, and how the propaganda is still used. And Nixon himself, at least his strategist, Ehrlichman, saying that, of course we knew that, our whole plan for the war on drugs was to imprison black men, black people, and also in order to get the hippies who were against the Vietnam War off the streets and in jail. And that's where our actual obsession starts. And that's also where we start to see the rapid increase of the amount of people behind bars.
Yeah, and back to the media, they promote this. Cops are heroes. They have shows where the cops are always doing great things. And if there is a bad cop, all the good cops unite together to bring them in. Yeah. And they do it with the military. That's what scares me, when people are so supportive of this military that fights for our freedoms and can do no wrong, when really neither one of those things are true. I'm scared that they look at these militarized police who will soon be like soldiers in our streets. They have checkpoints. There's not much difference as heroes as well, when they're really just violators of human rights.
There's the line of police are given almost limitless power to enforce laws, and people are willing to overlook police abuses and even forego civil liberties. What about civil forfeiture? Like, that's a big thing, and a lot of people are still okay with it. They're like, hell yeah, you take everything those drug dealers have. You take it away from them, damn it. And a lot of people that are being pulled over and having their cash just taken from them on the road and then sent on their way are not drug dealers. People are being pulled over. Nothing is being found in their car except cash, sometimes as little as under $1,000 cash. Imagine that. You go traveling on the freeway. You take a road trip. You have hundreds of dollars in your wallet. Imagine that. And this is going on, the civil forfeiture stuff, and it's getting worse and worse, and everybody's okay with it.
Yep,
and now we even have a president who said, he was at a meeting of sheriffs, and so and so said that they're opposed to civil forfeiture. We can fire him, right?
No, but that it goes deeper than just cash. They're taking people's money, they're taking people's houses, they're taking people's cars thousands of times a week, easy, maybe thousands of times a day, all across the country. People are losing their cars for some traffic violation or some kind of crap like that. License expired, tags are bad. They lose their car because they can't afford to get it out of the impound. And what do? They sell it in a auction, a police auction that supports the police. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and that is enabled by America's obsession with crime and punishment. I mean, it's something that, especially if you go into conservative areas of the country, there's just this idea that, if you commit a crime, you should be punished very severely.
But not if you're the Bundys occupying, land that's not yours.
Oh no, then you can actually point guns at federal agents, and that's okay.
Down.
Yeah. So, and there's definitely a double standard as far as, people aren't as interested in punishing white people for crimes as they are black people for crimes. And I think a lot of people don't even notice that they're doing it. There's this conditioning and people are just following it. I mean, God, that was me at one point in my life. And then, after police brutality and I got to look at some of these racial issues, I got to take a look at myself and realize, I looked back and I was like, wow, I was much more gung-ho about punishing somebody who sexually assaulted someone when they were black.
Yep.
Because it's just like ingrained into us.
It's socialized into us, and the media plays a big part into that. Movies do that. The stereotypes that they have. Certain, what black men are always criminals, or black women are always loud and welfare queens, right? And we can do this with each different group, but when it comes to crime and punishment, we generally see it portrayed just like that.
Absolutely. Crime and punishment, what it is it's a war. It's a war on race and it's a war on class. Mm-hmm. And it sucks. Like, if you're poor, crime and punishment punishment is something you are much more likely to experience. If you are of a dark-skinned race, you are more likely to experience punishment for crimes. I mean, you look at, Enron, a bunch of white people who robbed, millions of people of their retirement. Those people have no retirement fund anymore. And these Enron people, I think they all got fined, amounts that sound like a lot, $1 million, $2 million, but were just pennies to them. So for all
it was, but Enron, I just want to jump in there with Enron because it's one of the only cases that we've seen where there was jail time for a long period of time for some of them. And Bernie Madoff being another one. And the only time you see jail time is whenever they have ripped off rich white guys.
Exactly.
This is true, So, you go back to, with fascism, you see money being pooled to the rich. This is one of their tools that they use. They use the crime and punishment tool. And poor people and people of color are always disproportionately punished.
Yep, you've got to have money in order to make bail. You've got to have money in order to get a good lawyer. If you get a public defender, they probably have over 100 other cases, if not more, that they have under their belt at that moment. They don't have time to focus only on your case. It comes down to money. That's why you see over 90%, it's 95% of federal cases end in a plea. They don't even go to a trial. And it's not because 95% of them are guilty. It's because they don't have the money to continue fighting it. They go broke. They lose their houses. They lose their families trying to fight, even if they are innocent. Or
well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
they should just patrol Beverly Hills the same way they patrol Watts. You know,
Broken windows theory.
pull up two or three cars deep when they're pulling some rich white guy over. Take him out the car, cuff him, search his car, make him prove he's innocent before they let him go. And if he has
Yep.
passengers in the car, each one of them needs to prove their innocence as well. You know, I suspect they would find a whole lot of drugs and some weapons and a whole lot of the same things they find in Watts on these people that they never stop and never search and never even bother with.
Oh, the
Well,
FBI
yeah.
has no problem admitting that they are more likely to find drugs and weapons on the white people that they search, that they do stop. And that is, but you have to understand, the main reason is because they stop them so few, and usually they actually have a reason to stop that group versus like stop and frisk or driving while black or driving while Hispanic, where everybody gets pulled over. And
you know, those aren't valid reasons. You know,
no, you're absolutely right. They're
they
not.
should just
They
say
are
this
not.
white dude here in the Bentley looks a little suspicious. I don't know where he got that expensive car. I need to pull him over and check this shit out. That's what they need to do.
Yeah, that's what they need. That's what they'll never do, though. You know, and that's just a fucked up thing about America that is just a part of the American condition. With the whole thing about fighting charges, you know, how it costs money, you can't afford to fight it. You especially can't afford to fight it in a society that has been conditioned to love punishing criminals, that has been conditioned to believe that if you are sitting in a courtroom with a lawyer by you under charges, you must have done something to wind up there. You know, that's what you're going up against when you come in here, because you look at all these police shows, the police only arrest criminals. And then you look at the outrage articles passed around on social media, you know, this pedophile who sexually assaulted this 8-year-old girl and stuff like this. And those are the articles you see about crime getting passed around, leading one to believe that that's what the criminals that are being arrested are, when in fact the majority of criminals being arrested are committing crimes that affected nobody except themselves.
Yep. Using mugshots as victims, black victims, in order to somehow, even though you may not be saying the words, but saying that they deserved it because they had this, you know, previous conviction or previous charge against them, is pretty regular within our media.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. So this one's definitely happening in America. There's just like no doubt about it. And now we have a president who beats his chest and talks about, you know, it doesn't matter if you're not even convicted. Like police, the moment they encounter you, should just rough you the fuck up and slam your head against the roof of the police car as they're putting you in the police car.
Yep, endorsing police brutality. You have a president who said that the Central Park 5 should have been executed, took out an entire page in the New York Times, an ad saying that they should be executed before they were convicted. And then, of course, they were convicted. And then, more than 10 years later, the DNA came out and proved that all 5 of them were innocent. All 5 of those black kids who went to jail for over a decade were innocent. And just last year stated that they should still be executed no matter what the evidence showed.
I mean, they're black and he's a Nazi. What do you expect?
I know.
And that's a new one too, you know, is we're seeing more and more of this where people are in prison. They have been exonerated by DNA evidence, and they're keeping them in prison anyway. And if they have a death penalty, their death penalty is still scheduled. And, like, America's completely okay with this.
A lot of us aren't. It's just these stupid people that are brainwashed. I mean, what people don't understand is the more you criminalize every little thing people can do, the more people you're going to have that are criminals.
Yes.
It doesn't make them an actual criminal. It just means they're breaking every little rule and regulation that you want to call a crime.
And what people need to, you know, really think about is the fact that the laws are made by white men, old white men at that, and they get to choose what is the law and what is not. And a crime is nothing more than something that has broken that law. And that's, I mean, you can look at the differences in states with marijuana right now, right? You've got it illegal in Colorado, even though Jeff Sessions is doing everything he can to get rid of that. Or the other 6 states now after the last election.
In 2018, it'd be legal here.
Exactly. And you know, just that's what I use to try to really make people realize how relative laws are. You know, it was illegal until 1919 for women to vote. And then who got the right to vote? Just white women. Just white women could vote. We always say women could vote. No, white women could vote. And then, you know, you've got until later on, I think it's the 1960, when black women and men can vote. And then we can go into that in a whole other situation of how they even weren't allowed really until 1965.
Yeah.
And so, you know, look at the laws and how they change. It's always going to be based on the time period, the location, the history, and then look at why those laws were made.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I'm fond of pointing this out to people who want to, you know, just lockstep support law enforcement. I ask them, well, where was law enforcement when labor was organizing and trying to put an end to sweatshop practices? Where was law enforcement? Was law enforcement upholding their right to do that, or was law enforcement beating them down? Where was law enforcement during the civil rights movement? Was law enforcement, you know, protecting their right to do so, to march against the horrible practices that were going on, or was law enforcement beating them down in the streets of Selma?
Law enforcement is doing what it started off meant to do and what it's been doing ever since and what it will continue to do unless we stop it, which is protect rich white people's property. And when they started law enforcement, some of that property was other people. Every time that we as a people have wanted to move forward and progress, we have had to do that by going through law enforcement. We have had to face law enforcement and overcome the obstacle they presented in order to move forward as a society. And that is a fact that nobody, no matter how much they love cops, can dispute.
It's true.
Yep.
It's also why we can't get any convictions on officers. You know, you're conditioned in the United States to believe that officers are always telling the truth. And then if you're in a jury pool and you have the nerve to say that you don't believe everything an officer says, they get rid of you. So you're not on the jury.
If they even make it that far to a jury.
I know that for a fact. You're right. If they make it to a jury, I have no doubt. But if you have the nerve to admit that you don't believe everything they say, you are not allowed on that jury. So that's cherry picking.
Yep. So this one definitely.
Anyone have anything else to add to this episode?
The only thing I would add is to remember that a lot of this we can relate directly to Trump. This is going way beyond that. This is America, and this is the way it's been for generations now.
Well, you know, as somebody who has had his life transformed by police brutality, and had to spend a lot of time putting his life back together after police brutality. You know, there's a lot of reasons for me to hate Trump, but this is the thing that really sets me off about him, his total support of law enforcement's ability to, I mean, they can shoot you if you're unarmed, not even looking in their direction, say they feared for their life, and they'll get away with it. And yes, they're supposed to have a warrant to kick in my door and go through my house illegally, but we all know that if they kick in my door and go through my house illegally, yes, they probably won't get a conviction, but they're not going to get in trouble for committing breaking and entering, the crime of breaking and entering, which is what it is if you don't have a warrant that says you have a reason to believe that something is going on in that house that needs to be dealt with.
You're absolutely right. The one thing, and then piggybacking off that and what I said, we do have a big issue now under Trump as well. I shouldn't say now, but what I mean is that all of the this DOJ under Jeff Sessions and Trump has specifically stated that they will not put pressure on police departments to change, and for those that had consent decrees already, that they do not have to follow them. So any little, and believe me, the steps made were small for anybody who was paying attention. They were small steps. They were not holding people accountable. They were not people getting in trouble, for killing and racial profiling and their targeting of the Black community, the Hispanic community, the Native community. But they were small steps in the right direction, and all of that has been wiped away, and it was wiped away in a matter of days.
Yep. Well, we're going to wrap this one. So thank everybody for listening. Stay tuned tomorrow. We're going to be talking about rampant cronyism and corruption and how it pertains to the United States. Looks like that's going to be another check mark on the 14 tenets that pertain to the United States.
Yeah, so, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
It does. United States.
Only 2 left.
Yeah, we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Thanks for listening.